so it makes you wonder, like, why do we have taco day?
Well, I don't know, but how often do like it's Women's Day, but like we're not doing anything. It's just cool.
True.
It's just a way. It's a reason to post on Instagram.
Yeah. Now if we got like buffets in every classroom because it was Women's Day and women got to go first, now that would be distracting, and I would be totally down for it.
I'm really against it because it's like we're all about equality here, and then suddenly we have a day where women are better.
Yeah. I don't know. I just like celebrating
but
things.
Yeah.
Yeah. I just want to celebrate things.
I'll take it. Yeah.
I prefer Pi Day, which is coming up.
Pie day.
Yes.
Oh yeah,
And
it
you
is
can
coming up
celebrate
really
multiple
fast.
things. It could be pie like a number, or it could be the actual pie.
Yeah, for my
Yeah.
I eat pie.
We celebrated Pi Day in my class last year, and everyone brought in a different pie. It was pretty great.
my math class, you got extra credit for taking a picture of yourself eating pie.
Oh my goodness.
And I was at the cabin, so I had to carry a pie all the way out there.
Actually, yes. I remember that, and you had to stand in a weird position trying to get to send.
Yeah. Hold the phone like.
Yeah. Up in the air in Toronto.
Oh my gosh.
I don't know. I think I'm more aware of the really weird holidays because
So-
people post on Instagram about them.
Whale Day, Alaska Day.
National Siblings Day. Woo,
So
siblings.
a friend on Facebook posted this yesterday, and I thought, oh, this is terrific. A great survey of what we've covered so far, and a little bit ahead. Some saucer we won't even touch, but so Heraclitus, you can't eat the same donut twice.
Okay.
Plato, all donuts share in ideal donutness.
That's the way to put it.
Aristotle, a donut contains its donutness. Augustine, donuts need grace to be fully donut. If you're not saved by grace, but not alone, but you need grace and well. Descartes, a donut's whole proves the existence of the donut. Locke, donuts taste good to me. Hume, donuts exist because I imagine donuts. Kant, a donut equals my total experience of donuts.
Okay. Yeah.
Like roll the ground. Yay.
Women deserve donuts too.
Yay.
Yes.
That's
Um,
true.
I can't believe that they didn't have something for Hegel. Hegel would have said something like, the donut is the entire spirit of donut, including all, that would include what we mean by donut. Mill, donuts are good if they make people happy.
Aw. Wait, what's that guy's name?
Mill,
Is that the guy that we're talking about with
Yes.
head
JS or
heads?
the
Edens?
person,
Edens.
the
Edens.
person that we're still, I haven't
Okay.
really finished,
Okay,
I've
cool.
got to cover some more of him. Kierkegaard, which means churchyard, which means cemetery. I have faith that donuts are delicious. You have to take a leap of faith with Kierkegaard.
Right.
Marx, which we will be looking at today. Everybody deserves donuts. Nietzsche, stop at nothing to get your donut. The will to power. Saussure, notice what we've got is a roll in French, right? In German, I guess that's Italian. So he's, donut, they all eat the donut. Wittgenstein, fried pastry, donuts, right? But also zero, it's a donut. Parking lot spins, do donuts. And a spare tire. So that's kind of, Wittgenstein's into language games. The meaning is its context. So, and Beauvoir, patriarchy is responsible for the shape of the donut.
That's good.
I like this.
So what would is it Feuerbach?
Feuerbach,
When he
would probably say something like, if not for the flame, the donut would not exist. Feuer means fire.
Right.
Bach means stream, so a little like a crick.
Fire Street.
So his name is Stream on Fire,
Huh.
which is just weird.
Or it could be like Fire
Like
Street.
Spinoza saying that donuts are God.
Spinoza,
Mhm.
you're a mode of God.
They're a mode of God.
What about Leibniz?
Had to have some kind of a monad. I think we have to do the monad. Donut is the sweet monad. I don't know.
I hate
That's
donuts.
just funny.
Was he the Englishman or was that,
Schopenhauer
Schopenhauer
would
was
say
the I hate
something
donuts.
about, no, because
I
he
don't know
would
how
be
you can-
obsessed with how, like,
I don't know how I
your
can
desire
share
to
that
eat
if you're
donuts is
interested.
running your life.
Okay, so I really did a terrible job for you. I think it's great to share the Sam Harris argument because an important part of Mill is Mill attempting to apply the new paradigm that we get essentially from Hegel, that at the same year that he publishes on Liberty, 1859, is the year that Charles Darwin publishes The Origin of the Species. Charles Dickens, a contemporary, is also writing novels to try to get the British upper classes to care more for the poor. And Karl Marx is living in London, writing in the British Museum, where they used, up until a few years ago, they had the desk where he did most of his writing while he was there. It was still preserved there so that you could see the desk where Marx wrote. But they upgraded the library recently there and did away with this desk, and I thought, well, that was kind of, maybe they put it somewhere else so you could see it, but you can't see it in the museum and the library. Right? But this was, more notes on his basic life. His work on women's liberation was co-authored with his wife Harriet Taylor, who was brilliant, by the way. And so that's kind of important to mention. He did have one term in Parliament, I mentioned that. So some of the important works that he did, his system of logic. Mill's methods are very important. The basic methods are agreement. When you're doing scientific experiments, you're looking for agreement. You're also looking for difference and cause and effect relationships. The joint method of agreement and difference is, of course, the strongest of those methods. Concomitant variations, I love the phrase, because it means as the possible causes go up and the effects go up, as the causes go down and the effects go down, that makes it look like these two concomitant variations are related causally, right? So if global warming is going up and at the same time carbon in the air is going up, well, it looks like there's a concomitant variation there between. That's essentially what they're doing. Of course, it could be much more complex than that. Probably certainly is. But still, that's... And the reason this is important is because prior to Mill's methods, his logic book, people were really, really bad at doing inductive reasoning. It seems like it shouldn't be the case, but there are a lot of people, even in like modern Europe, that thought miracles, happen. That's kind of a joke. That life spontaneously arrived. Like if you had a damp shirt and a food source nearby, baby mice would just all of a sudden appear without parent mice. I mean, really, we can't even think that way anymore today because we're really into biological, science. Science has really transformed us. But here, I mean, you just go back this far. That's not, it seems to me, not that far ago, right? And people were clueless in general. By the way, there's some terrific stuff on the beginnings of science as a national enterprise as opposed to just a hobby of certain wealthy enough individuals that were curious and would like buy equipment on their own and stuff. One of the books that got that started was the Philosophical Breakfast Club. I said it got that started. It wasn't that it got that started. It was that the book is about how Britain ended up getting involved nationally in that. Here's the 4 individuals. Babbage, Charles Babbage, got the government to fund his attempt to make a calculating machine. Are you familiar with that?
Yeah, I think I read a book about, what's her name? Ada Lovelace or Lovegood. She was one of Byron's children who invented something that was related to this.
As far as I know, it never actually worked.
Oh.
The government spent a lot of money at the time enabling him to build this.
It's so huge.
Yeah, it fills a room.
Mm.
But it was supposed to do all sorts of calculations, and it's not electrified. You have to crank it.
Mm.
Yes. But when
That's
I was
like a calculator.
yes.
See why people couldn't cheat on their math tests as easily.
When I was at the NSA, the no such agency. No such thing. At the time I was there was an entry room where a lot of people would go by where they had a card reader, and they used to have punched cards that they had to enter into this to add data to the computer.
Weird.
That was in 1983. So, in fact, while I was there, my first job required me to learn how to use a terminal. So it had a screen. It was just a black and, well, it was actually green and black. So like the typing was in green. I had to enter in my data, and I had to hit enter and wait. Because what happened was there were 20, or actually 21 terminals in my section, and the computer would basically check them all every so often. And once you had enter, and then it would go in. That was the first machine I had to learn. Within a while, I ended up with an IBM PC. Well, they didn't. I don't think it was called a PC, but it was a standalone. That somehow I had to then transfer the information to the computer, and then it became a terminal, which was just what the previous one was, and then it became more of a computer, and so on. So it was constant, almost every 6 months. And I was there for 4.5 years that they upgraded the system. And it was just amazing how much money was being spent on that. But the computers were changing so rapidly that was happening. And it didn't really stop when I came up here, my next duty tour. We had lots of computers on base here that we were upgrading from previous kinds of models and so on. And then when I finished here and I went to my last duty tour, which was in Hawaii, everything was computerized. I had this huge Sun Microsystem screen with, it was Unix based, but it also had a open, or I think it was called Open Windows app that was part of the Unix. That basically I was the head of the shift for for all three of them, I guess. The NCOIC or whatever, right? In charge. And so I had like about 20 some little individual windows open up on my screen when I first sat down and turned on my apps and everything. So I could click on the screen and do whatever that was, do this one, do this one, do this one. It was amazing little, and the computer was only like this big.
Was the elephant cage up and running right behind the door?
Yes, when I was here, yeah. I was there. So computers, kind of amazing. But Herschel is another one. So if you're curious, really interesting book, really amazing. How the tides worked, all that stuff.
What is joint method of agreement and difference?
So agreement is when you're doing a scientific experiment and you find out that there's an agreement between a certain factor being present in the experiment and a certain effect happening.
Sure.
You know, and if that factor isn't there, and then the effect doesn't happen, that's difference.
Okay.
Right? So what you're trying to do in the experiment is figure out what causes this. And so in a way, what helps you understand that relationship is when it is there, this happens, but when it's not there, it doesn't. Right?
Okay.
So, yeah, so this is all very basic to us today.
Yeah.
I mean, you grew up in school doing science in grammar school, doing your science projects where the teachers talk about that. But imagine that first really started being understood thanks to John Stuart Mill. So you'd see why that makes him so significant to us. And notice that that's about the same time that the British industrialization really took place, which of course is also why Marx is so upset with the modernization of the workplace because of what that industrialization is doing to the workers, right? You know, we are always kind of inventing something new. Facebook, wow, look, you could, you know, it was what, what's his name? I can't even, gosh, how can I not remember?
Mark Zuckerberg.
Zuckerberg. He was in college, right? And trying to figure out a better way for students to get to know one another on campus or something, and he came up with Facebook.
Have you seen that movie that was made about the whole thing?
No.
I forget what it's called, but it was
Social network.
Social network. But boom, now Russia's using it to influence our election. You know, no one, even Mark Zuckerberg didn't expect that, right? Yeah. Right. So we invent something, some technological new development, and we think, wow, this will help grandmom talk to her grandchildren. And you actually change the face of political diplomacy and everything. I mean, because we literally have revolutions occurring in Arabic countries because of their ability to have this kind of communication. That was totally unexpected, right? It's totally changed the way international diplomacy works because people want to know instantly what's going on. No one wants people to meet in private and have secrets and so on, and then weeks later, out of negotiations, maybe have something small and incremental happen. No, we want instant, fix. Ban these weapons now, etc. Right? That's kind of very different, and we didn't. No one expected all of these things to happen. How are you going to know? Just even locally, seeing people posting pictures because they now have cameras on their driveways, so someone comes up and checks all their cars at night. Well, now the next day, of course, this is all posted and everyone can see Joe Snuffy checking out his neighbor's cars, right? You know, and so his pictures, and so just think what that does to his reputation, because everybody that recognizes him knows he's out there looking for things to steal from your car at night, right? Wow. And no one thought that was going to happen. I'm pretty sure. Maybe the inventor of the camera or something. But so, Mill's methods. The Subjection of Women was the book that he wrote with Harriet Taylor. So in utilitarian ethics, and the main point I'd like to suggest here is that this is science attempting to figure out how to have ethical theory, but at the same time adapt to the idea that there's evolution in morality, so that our understanding of morality, we have moral progress, but how can you still have moral principles then, right? So the greatest good for the greatest number. But what do we mean by the greatest good? And do we mean everybody? There's problems with that. One of my favorite quotes from John Stuart Mill in the text is that a dissatisfied human is, what's the expression? A dissatisfied human is more important than a happy pig. Let me see. Dissatisfied human being is. Okay. So this is going to ruin it if I were to use it as a quiz question, because I would ask you to complete the blank, fill in the blank, and you can see the blank there. So it's better to be a human being dissatisfied than a pig satisfied. I asked people in class over that, and I've actually had students say, if it came to it, they would rather be a happy pig.
Yeah, I mean, kind of. It makes sense. Guess it depends if you're a hedonist or not.
Well, but pigs get harvested within a few years.
Well,
Now,
yeah, but you wouldn't be.
You're happy
You wouldn't
for
care.
those few years.
Yeah, as happy as a pig in mud, you know. But when I see the happy pigs at like the state fair,
You know, yeah.
and it says right on top, you know, how much, you know, they are per pound, and I'm thinking that pig has no clue to what that sign is all about. You know, it's not great pig, you know, Wilbur. By the way, that's a silly thing, I know, but my problem with the book Charlotte's Web is that the pig was not important at all. The spider could write.
That's knowledge.
That
is
was
power.
what was important there.
I never cared about that as a kid though. Like I never got like the deeper meaning of it. I was just like, oh, it's a
Cool
cute thing.
story.
Yeah.
The only one where the spider's the good guy.
They had a literate spider, and
Right.
what are they all
Knowledge is
happy
power.
about?
Knowledge is
Dumb
power.
farmers. They're all thrilled with the pig. Some pig. Wow, it's some pig.
Why did she do that?
She was trying to save the pig.
She was smart. Yeah.
Did the pig end up getting saved?
Yes.
But then
She
Charlotte
dies.
Charlotte dies. Of course,
Sorry,
spiders.
spoiler alert. Ren does.
Well,
But then you have all the little baby spiders that are, you know, they're all literate spiders, and you know this is more important than The Secret of Nim. Which, have you ever seen that?
nothing is more important than The Secret of Nim. I can't even remember what The Secret of Nim is. We were talking about this the
National
other day.
Institute of Mental Health.
Here's the secret.
They made wise animals,
Yeah.
and the animals all fled and were living underground in order to avoid being exterminated once the experiment was over.
I liked that story.
Yeah, that book was awesome.
We had a dramatized audio.
Weird
version.
movie though, because I just always remember Nicodemus was terrifying.
It's a little creepy if you play dark music and listen to it at night. They play dark music in the audio one, and then we listen to it at night. That's
there are some problems with utilitarian ethics. Strictly speaking, the outcome is the most important part of it. So you're, it's a consequentialist system, which means the ends justify the means, which means you could do evil things if the outcomes are good. So doctors can do experiments on patients without
for the greater
telling them
good,
and
yeah.
stuff. And we've, of course, actually had American doctors in the past. It's illegal now, but as far as I know, but there were certain experiments that were done at the expense of the patients, especially if there was a racial difference.
Was it Tuscany? I'm trying to remember the name of the.
Yeah.
That, there was also the woman whose cells turned out to be really useful, and they didn't give her anything for it, even her family. There's all kinds of medical things and other kinds of things where you could say, okay, so if we blow up this village to make sure we get that Taliban leader, we're going to be killing 50, non-combatants, but it's worth it to get right. So that's a utilitarian approach. Whereas
That's very confusing, but makes sense, like, the views on that.
Whereas Kant, when we looking at Kant and his moral theory is a deontology. It says your duty, and your duty, it's actually a different thing, because you could have whatever the society tells you your duty is, right? But he also accompanied that by saying that all individuals had an inherent moral worth, and you could not use them as a means to something. So for Kant, it's totally wrong to use individuals for that. Is it okay to use rabbits to find out if this ointment will hurt your eyes, by putting it on the rabbit's eyes? Kant doesn't worry about rabbits, but we can today. If we want to worry about animals, even the dogs racing in the Iditarod or whatever, right?
People oppose that?
PETA.
What? Really?
Protest up here.
What?
Wait, the
Yeah.
PETA protest? Yeah.
Yeah, people for the eating of tasty animals is not really what PETA stands for.
I can't believe that.
They're the people for the ethical treatment of animals,
Even though
which,
they-
strictly speaking, if you're fond of eating animals, that's the ethical way to treat animals, to eat
I know,
them.
yeah. I used to
But
be
if
like
you think
super
that
into all
ethically
that,
you
but
should,
They also euthanize.
yeah, their organization, their shelter isn't even a no-kill shelter. They kill pets for temperamental problems, which is weird.
They don't think
It's-
pets should be pets, so if it's a pet, it's not an essential habitat, so they'd rather kill it.
Oh.
Yeah, I know, PETA is weird. I used to be super into all that,
Jeez.
but it's super skewed, especially because most of them are they're vegan. Because I used to be associated and stuff. They're vegans, but they also buy from the same companies that are deforestation and that aren't fair trade and stuff. So it's also the exploitation of human workers. So it's who are you doing that for? Because sure, you didn't eat an animal straight up, but that super fancy coffee you just bought supports deforestation and also exploits workers in third world countries. So it's what are you doing?
So we can get into all kinds of interesting issues over consequentialism. Then there's rules, utilitarianism. There's different types of utilitarianism, because just blurting out the greatest good for the greatest number doesn't really tell you what you should actually do. So you get into all sorts of specifics.
So is he close to, what's his name? The Prince guy.
Machiavelli?
Yeah. Did he follow the same, because I remember a long time ago in high school, the ends justify the means came up with that.
I suppose so. Although no one, as far as I know, no one calls Machiavelli a utilitarian because, strictly speaking, this is when utilitarianism is invented as a point of view. But it can be clearly traced and associated with Epicurus, the greatest happiness. Happiness is the goal. So yeah, it's probably influenced by Machiavelli.
He was more tyranny, it seemed like, than just the greatest good.
And one interpretation of him, because he was basically writing for the Medici when they were in power. But there are other books that he wrote that really are quite opposite. So
read The Prince.
Yeah. There's plays that he wrote that are hilarious that are just the opposite. They're making fun of the prince. So
Throw people off.
it just makes it impossible, really, to figure out what Machiavelli really thought about.
He knew how to write to his audience.
He was right. He was writing for the audience that would pay him for his specific writing. So
And ends justify means, right
and yeah, so he's It didn't really work out too well for him actually in the long run, because he ended up out of power, and the Medicis were out of power, and he was out, and he never got back into a kind of comfortable life after that. But then this is more Mill specific. One of the things and I didn't finish this quote. I got stuck on the. But so it continues on. It is so basically, even if you're an unhappy human being, he's convinced that the quality of life that a human has, means you're not going to be happy all the time. Whereas a pig can be happy, but it's look at the rest. It is better to be a Socrates dissatisfied than a fool satisfied. And if the fool or the pig is of a different opinion, it is only because they only know their own side of the question. The fool doesn't understand the more complex nature of things. The individual that has the college education and has taken my course and understands how complex things are is going to be sad about all this stuff.
It's stressful.
But yeah, it's stressful, but you're going to be better off. Maybe.
Ignorance is kind of bliss at times too.
Well, yeah, but
Well, then, until you learn, because then I don't know, it'd bother you if you knew that you didn't know something. I guess
yeah.
it's cool to be smart, I suppose. It's cool to know stuff.
Yeah. But yeah, once you get that level of an education, it's not going to be easy for you to reach the kind of happiness you had when you were a kid, when you had a piece of apple pie. Because now you're eating the apple pie with whipped cream and you realize, the calories, crap.
But also when you're a little kid and you don't get to have apple pie, you maybe get a little bit more disappointed than you do when you have a little more perspective. So.
Really looking forward to pie right now.
Yeah.
Second time.
But then when you're talking about the greater good for the greater number, how do we actually interpret what Mill's thinking about that? Well, he was not extremely well-to-do, but he was educated. He had a good income. As I think I mentioned, he ended up, in his later days, he retired with Harriet to the French Riviera. But he argues no one has a moral right to our generosity or beneficence. So he invents liberalism. On Liberty is the book that invents liberalism. Obviously, liberalism and what it means to be a liberal today has gone through quite an evolution of changes. Just the history of it and everything would be quite complex. And what does it mean to be a liberal? I would just off the cuff argue that he's closer in a way to what we might call today a libertarian, if that makes sense, right? But so he would be, on the one hand, the kind who would say that the state does owe a kind of safety net to people. And keep in mind that the British were able to avoid communism, even though Marx is there and trying to stir up that kind of thing. And the British kind of said, "Oh, it's Germany kicked him out of Germany, France kicked him out of France, and England said, meh, let him write." But they accomplished some fantastic things in this period. One of the greatest examples of this is, was it the Glass Castle? What's it called, the Glass Castle? Wasn't that? The crystal something. House. Isn't that it? Yes, this is it. So the British, notice this is 1854. They built this, and inside they had a fantastic array of new devices and industrial things that they developed. And people were invited. This was like an international exhibition, right? And people could come and see all these products. Millions of people, of course, mostly British, came, and they were all thrilled with all their success. So that gave them a national pride over how powerful their industry was. So they were less likely to be interested in tearing it down and revolting against it. Plus the legislation, and Mill was part of this, did change things to make workers' lives better. And so they had unions. Marx didn't take into account unions per se as they would develop and negotiate for raises and things of that sort. And so since unions can incrementally improve your lives, that kind of takes off the edge that leads people towards kind of an open rebellion, right? That Marx was encouraging. He thought there was only one way to make things more fair, and actually that's not true. Marx was wrong. And they demonstrated that in England at the time. So that's all pretty impressive. But at the same time, he does feel that when you have like a sophisticated taste, that society owes you the kind of happiness that sophisticated taste requires, and it's more expensive than... So one of the things I think about here in town is I'm sure it's much cheaper to go to the Sullivan and watch the fights. I don't know what the cost per ticket is. I've never been there. Although one of my sons actually participated and was in fights and got beat the crap out of by the opponent for the money. I can't believe he does that kind of stuff. That's the one with the fetal alcohol, right? So of all, by the way, his responses, his physical responses are slow, because that's part of his mental disability. So if he sees you getting ready to punch him, he goes, boom, and then he reacts. Pretty dumb. So not really a good boxer. But it's way cheaper for people, and I think it's more popular for people to go and watch the fights than the opera. The opera is way more expensive. You go there, the big beautiful pack, BP or somebody has funded this because the ticket prices at no way cover the actual cost of bringing all these people there. There's funders, that donate money to the opera so that it can run and so on. So it's way more expensive, and yet there's so few people there to watch, the performances, three or four, I guess, performances, right? Way more people are enjoying the much cheaper boxing, but strictly speaking, Mill would support the idea that the money spent on the opera is something that the society owes to the upper class in that society for their benefit. The other people could have enjoyed it if they came up with the money and went, but they're not interested. Right? You get it? So that's kind of controversial too. He is also still thinking Hobbesian security. So giving to each what they deserve, good for good as well as evil for evil, is not only included in the idea of justice as we have defined it, but as a proper object. But as I mentioned, there are some critiques. Ethical theory, whatever, may lead to unsatisfactory outcomes if one assumes that idiocy is widespread. I love that. I think it's one of Mill's great lines. You need people to be raised properly and be moral in order for the society to function. That certainly still applies absolutely today. And now this one, it's kind of odd, and this really comes from John Rawls, who we think of as a utilitarian, but it's confusing because we can also think of him as a Kantian in some way. So Rawls is not clearly one of John Rawls. He's an American philosopher. If you're died in 2002, and if you're going to study law, he and Nozick are two of the main period individuals that you would study for law. He's the one that gives us our contemporary version of the hypothetical situation that Hobbes does, that he calls the state of nature. By now, there's no way we're ever going to figure out what the original state of nature was, but instead Rawls talks about the original situation, and that's now. So when we're starting our contemplation on how we should change the laws of the original situation is the way things are right this minute, right? And his famous suggestion is that we use the veil of ignorance, put the veil over our heads so that we basically, in creating laws, imagine what it would be like if we ourselves were born into this society without knowing what our place would be. So not knowing whether I would be wealthy, in a wealthy family or an impoverished family or whatever, so not knowing that, veil of ignorance, right? How would I want society to be in case I suddenly arrived and was in any of the positions? How would I make society, and obviously that makes him a liberal to think that way. And Robert Nozick is kind of the opposite person. So, okay. And so this comes from Rawls, and it's the critique that when you're trying to apply utility as a principle, you have to realize that some agents do require more expense. So you might have a scientific study, going to Mars or something, right? Very expensive. And you know what? It probably won't help most people living today. But the thing is, for those scientists that are involved in this, and for the future, et cetera, there's an element there that we ought to spend the money for. It's incredibly expensive, but at the same time, it's worth it to those individuals that will benefit from it. So that's kind of intriguing.
I have a question about one of the notes, but I can't find it, and it's back a little ways, about justice. Yeah. Justice implies something which is not only right to do and wrong not to do, but which some individual person can claim as his moral right. What does that mean?
Okay. Where was that?
It's just
Oh,
right
up
over
here.
slide
Okay.
5. Yeah.
So, like if I'm walking by someone who's dying on the curb, right? Justice would imply that I should have I should actually help them.
Okay.
It would be wrong not to help them.
But
Maybe call or something. But here's an interesting problem. So like when we argue today that healthcare is a moral right, well, all of the moral rights initially in our social contract as American citizens were negative rights, right?
Right.
So they denied the government the opportunity to arrest you for no it had to be within legal cause, right? And so on. But none of those initial rights gave me the right that demanded something from you,
Right.
right? So when when we approach the idea of saying we have a right to health care, you're expecting the government to actually fund what potentially could be very expensive in order to take care of me, right? And that's demanding, it's a claim on us, right? And a lot of rights, natural rights folks, looking at our contract would say, there is no such right that can put a claim on you, right? So, in which way can we say that an individual can claim something as his moral right? Right? No clear way to answer this. Certainly for Mill, individuals had the right to food and protection. So when we look at like Oliver in Dickens' book Oliver Twist, you have the odd situation of the workhouse and all these poor abandoned children, being taken care of in this place. And I don't know if you're familiar with, here the board of trustees or whatever of this place are feasting in the same house where,
Please.
yeah, and they're all, eating gruel, et cetera. Dickens is clearly trying to indicate there's something wrong with this.
Right.
This is terrible.
Oh, I read that when I was younger, but still I didn't look at it in like a political way or anything.
Yeah, Dickens was trying to improve the lot of the impoverished people. So was Mill. So was Marx in their different ways. But, there's a public concern that you see all these people, and that's clearly an irritant. How do you fix it? So if you're going downtown and you see people in the corners with cardboard signs and stuff, you feel, this is wrong. But what's the right way to handle it? And it's not clear at all to me that utilitarianism indicates a clear way of dealing with that. It recognizes it's a problem. We should do something, but at this point, that's too early to figure out how social change is going to happen.
So, for Mills, he says generosity, no one has a right to our generosity,
Right.
but it is part of, like, the social contract that
Right.
I
So
owe
how
something.
if they don't have a right to your generosity, but the public trough is
Right, yeah,
fed by who?
me.
Somebody
Yeah.
has to do this. So it's a complex issue, and we could go over how there's actually two. So. So we have Hayek, however you say it. You're familiar with him?
Yes.
Okay. So he's one economist, and I don't know, I can't split the screen, but I'll put the other one up is. Did I type his name correctly? So here's the other. So Keynesian economics argues that the state, as long as remember I'm old enough that I can remember this stuff being something I used to remember, but if I recall it correctly, Keynesian economics says it's good for the state to assist the economy by using its wealth to, like, build roads, give people jobs, help the overall number of jobs that are available, and so on. Whereas, Hayek, will argue it's just the opposite, that might immediately help things out. In the long run, it's going to create perturbations, or whatever you would call them, in the capitalist system, because it would be better, really, if these kinds of jobs don't really pay for themselves, for the capitalist system to basically weed those kinds of things out, right? So, and if you use the government funding to basically frustrate the normal capitalistic system, then what's going to happen is, okay, so people will be happy now, but 20 years from now, the government's going to collapse because of a deficit, which of course is what a lot of people still say. So there's like a conflict between these 2 points of view that we could actually see through various administrations back from when they were arguing about this. So the typical is the conservatives will go with Hayek, whereas the liberals will go with Keynes, right? And so you see this back and forth thing. Right now we're going through a period of Hayek, Trump, essentially supporting a conflict against the state funding things and taxing people to pay for it, right? Whereas the Clinton administration was a little bit more that way. Obama was a little bit more, the other way, obviously, right? And so this is, and when you get right down to it, we don't know, because this is all an experiment. But the trouble with it is you can't repeat the experiment to see, oh, this worked, this didn't. By the time we figure, and we can't really figure it out because there's so many other elements involved in changing. Well, I better get over to the next two. Feuerbach I have up here because he was an influence on Marx and others. Is younger than Marx. I have Max Stirner. These are all individuals who are members of the Young Hegelians. They're kind of followers of Feuerbach. Feuerbach is a critic of Hegel. He gives us some interesting things. The famous view is that God created man in her own image. But Feuerbach comes along and says man created God in his own image. So the reason God has long white hair and a beard sits on a throne and farts and, oh, no, sorry, he doesn't fart, I guess. I don't know. Does God fart? I don't know. I don't know if God farts. But if he, does he eat? I don't know. If he eats, he
No, he
probably
doesn't.
farts, right? I don't know. They never really, actually, I think Martin Luther probably, he does refer to man as God's shit, which is kind of horrible. Martin Luther didn't really strike me as the kind of person I would have liked to know. He killed a lot of people anyway. Kill them all and let God sort them out. I think that was his quotation.
I was looking through the questions for the next set of essays, and I couldn't find when they were due. So
So that's weird. March 6th.
oh, okay. March 6th.
So now.
Or I meant the third. The third.
Oh, the third one?
Yeah, yeah. The final ones. Are they just due?
The very
finals?
last class.
Okay, awesome. That's what I thought.
Which is, yeah, final due. The email. May 1st. Because we don't have class on the 3rd. Good question. Sorry the syllabus is so Feuerbach is going to influence all of these folks, and a big part of this is their atheism. Marx is clearly an atheist. It was a Jewish family, but long since not really Jewish, if that makes sense. Cute little thing, Marx did write poetry, and it's some of the most awful poetry I've ever seen. Of course, it could be because it's in translation. I haven't read his poems in German. And he wrote them to his wife, Jenny, who he loved, and they had children, and some of them outlived them, and so on. Their lives were not really happy. They didn't really have good health. They were impoverished. Basically, what kept them afloat was his friend Friedrich Engels helped fund them, who wasn't that wealthy on his own, basically was stealing it from his company in order to help fund Marx. But even so, they were, like, he would not have enough money to pay the rent and things. And there were times he couldn't go outside because he had pawned his shirt and shoes.
Oh, jeez.
Can you imagine pawning your shirt and shoes? Who would want to like buy Marx's shirt? That's
Yeah, I mean, you can assume he probably wasn't very sanitary if he was that poor already.
That's and
how much
he had
would they
boils
even
on
go
his skin.
How much would that even go for? Because if you try to pawn clothes now, you get 2 cents. So if he was
Unless
that
they're
desperate-
shredded, and other things, that would make them more expensive.
Yeah.
Confused about how
I
that
think
works.
people should give me their pants if they want to hold them, and I will wear them for a year and a half, and I'll give them back. No waffles.
So, Max Stirner, there's actually a couple others,
Okay.
can't think of the, so, well, who are the young Hegelians? Let me look that up real quick.
Anti-utopian? Would it just be dystopian?
Yeah. Well, I guess dystopian would be the opposite, but anti-utopian, maybe you're against it.
And yeah, I guess
younger members, Karl Marx.
Carl Schmitt.
So now,
Italianism?
so this is of course following Hegel in what sense? Well, especially for the logic, you get that sense of this dialectical process, right? And remember, as we were reading the stage at which self-consciousness becomes aware of itself, the identity you have is the identity of your identity and your non-identity, right? So you get this European way of talking that
Yeah.
is so frustrating to so many Americans and British today, because they're playing kind of a multi-level linguistic game, right? And that's an important part of Hegel, but it's also this evolutionary process where thesis fights antithesis, et cetera. And it happens not just at the level of your own self-consciousness or the interrelationship between you and others, or you and a group, or groups, or larger and larger groups, et cetera. But all of that is sociology, and sociology is economic. And so what Marx is looking at is economics, and he's really a beginner in, I mean, we could trace economics officially, I think, back to Adam Smith, probably others, Montesquieu, I don't know. I mean, obviously, economics is an important part of history all the way. But nonetheless, as a science, Marx is certainly significant. And in fact, when we look at contemporaries today, the position today, BBC, Marx. This is fantastic. I highly recommend it. I know it's a whole hour,
Dover.
but I
The most
hope you get
dangerous
the
man in
chance to
Europe
watch
was
it.
about to arrive on Britain's shores. His preachings are so incendiary, he's been forced out of his native country. Only liberal Britain will tolerate his presence.